Joining us now is Gerald Steinberg, CEO of NGO Monitor. Thank you for joining us. We know that there have been efforts to extend the first stage of the hostage and ceasefire deal and for Hamas to release additional Israeli hostages, or what we now know as the Witkoff plan. But Hamas refused, and now we're hearing Israel stopped the entry of aid into Gaza in response to their refusal. What do you make of all of this?
First of all, the provision of aid to Gaza allows Hamas to maintain its structure. It allows them to perhaps regroup. It allows them to attack Israelis in the future. It allows them to keep millions of people, 1.5, maybe up to 1.7 million people in Gaza under strict control by this terrorist organization, this jihadist terrorist organization. And that is what Israel went to war to stop. And if humanitarian aid continues to go in, they will regroup. That was the biggest mistake that the Biden and Lincoln administration did. They did it for very basic electoral reasons to appease the constituencies in the United States. They nevertheless lost the election. And now the Trump administration has said, we don't have to put that pressure on you anymore. We are not going to force you to provide aid, which goes to Hamas anyway. It's called aid. But in fact, as we've all seen the pictures, all those tunnels where the Israeli hostages were brutalized, were tortured, were kept in some cases like the Bibas family murdered, that was all stolen from aid. And that's a critical point here. This is not Israel imposing some sort of new condition. It is trying to send a message to Hamas and its backers in Qatar and elsewhere that can put pressure on Hamas. What was before will not continue. You will not get aid if you continue to hold the hostages. So I think there is a chance now that we will have something different, that the Hamas leadership will understand, will get pressured, will be forced to agree to the Witkoff plan, which still allows them, unfortunately, to hold on to hostages, half the remaining hostages, for a number of days or weeks. But if Israel can get half of those hostages back in the next week or two, that will be a tremendous breakthrough. That's the only game in town.
Now, at the moment, are we at a standstill? Hamas must have a lot to lose if the deal collapses. They certainly rely on this aid and also on caravans and tents needed for housing. Is it not within their interest to keep the ceasefire going and the aid pouring in?
One of the biggest problems, I'd say this as an academic who taught international relations for 40 years, and now look at this, and we taught our students about looking at rational actors, at interests, at power. We're not sure, I'm not sure at all, that Hamas makes rational decisions. October 7th was an irrational decision and irrational policy. They thought that perhaps they could get a big uprising against Israel. They totally failed. And yet they're maintaining that same policy now over 500 days after October 7th. So whether Hamas is the leadership that's left, we also don't know very much about the who's left and how decisions are made among the Hamas leadership. If they are rational, they probably would have given up, would have allowed the hostages to be released in exchange for allowing 1.7, let's say, million people in Gaza to get necessary food and water and perhaps start rebuilding their lives. Hamas is desperate to maintain control. That's the real issue here. And if they can be shown that they will not be able to maintain control, if they can be broken, if Israel goes back to war, then they will lose much more gravely than they have already. That's really the issue on the table. And there's a hope. I think Qatar is a key actor. It always has been. If Qatar says what they should have said 500 days ago, we're not supporting you anymore, Hamas, unless you let the hostages go, unless you stop the fighting and the attacks against Israel. If Qatar doesn't do that, then there has to be pressure on Qatar. And there I'm somewhat skeptical. I would hope that Trump, President Trump, the administration, and including Steve Witkoff, the special negotiator, would say to the Qataris, it's up to you to put pressure on Hamas. You're the only source of external pressure on them. You have to move, and they haven't done that yet. So we'll have to see if that's actually going to happen.
I wouldn't hold my breath waiting. If negotiations ultimately fail, how likely is a return to a full-scale war? We know that the IDF has been instructed to prepare as they're currently holding off on the perimeter. But what would that look like in practical terms?
First of all, the odds are about 100%. I very rarely predict anything. But certainly, if the hostages are not released, if there's no agreement towards that in the next, let's say, few days, maybe a week at the most, and don't forget, we're in the Ramadan month now, and there's feasting in the evenings, and this is a place and a time where there is an awareness among Hamas and its supporters that this is a critical time. If we don't get an agreement within, let's say, a week, and that's a rough number, I really don't have any inside information, I think we'll see a full-scale Israel return to Gaza. All the areas that were where Israel withdrew, or the IDF withdrew, especially the Netzarim corridor in the middle, and all the other areas, north and south, I think we'll see a return to the kind of situation that we had until the ceasefire, which is large-scale movement of people in Gaza from the north to the south, from the south to the north, and full-scale IDF operations to clean up all the rest of the tunnels, all the rest of the Hamas operatives. It will be a major operation. But let's remember that they no longer have much support from Iran. Hezbollah is completely out of the picture.
Thank you very much for your input today.
Thank you.